Welcome to the Point Cybersecurity Podcast. Each week, join Eric Trexler and Rachel Lyon to explore the latest in global cybersecurity news, trending topics, and industry transformation initiatives impacting governments, enterprises, and our way of life. Now, let's get to the point.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of To The Point Podcast. I'm Rachel Lyon. As always, here with my co-host, Eric Trexler. Eric, I feel like I haven't talked to you in ages. What's been going on?
I feel like we've been talking about video editing all week as we're doing voiceover work and splicing videos, but maybe.
But, it's not like real conversation. I feel like I've been shut out of your life for the last 2 weeks, and I'm dying to know what's going on.
I think it's been a week or two with the podcast, so I agree with you.
Yeah,
I have missed you. But I'm just sitting here in D.C. freezing my you-know-what off. So you're not missing much.
Speaking of freezing, today's guest, who is in Cambridge, Massachusetts, Dr. Josephine Wolff. She is Associate Professor of Cybersecurity Policy at the Tufts University, the Fletcher School. She's also author of the book, You'll See This Message When It Is Too Late, the legal and economic aftermath of cybersecurity breaches, from MIT Press in 2018. So welcome. Must read. Welcome, Josephine.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I bet it's colder up there than it is in DC.
It is pretty cold here right now.
We've been in the teens and 20s for the better part of a week and a half or so, and I think next week same thing.
I don't want to make this a
you're
competition.
10 degrees off of that.
But we're like in the 7, 8, 9 degree realm right now.
Yeah. I just replaced a car battery today. So it's cold.
Yeah.
Anyway. Okay, Rachel, back to you. My woes are not of consequence.
Absolutely. So where to start, right? First of all, but one of the things I was kind of your many writings, Josephine, and I love your writing, and it's just so fascinating to read. But on the vein of like cyber insurance, and it sounds like you also have a book coming out soon on cyber insurance, which we absolutely want to talk about. But you were talking about cyber insurance and defining cyber war, and people are kind of getting into these really crazy gray areas. And I would love for you to kind of expand on kind of what you're seeing out there.
Yeah, it's a really interesting, I think, an exciting area. It's hard to get people sometimes really jazzed about insurance, but I've spent a couple years looking at it now. I have this book coming out later this year with MIT called Cyber Insurance Policy. And the thing that I think has been really interesting to track in just really the past 2 years or so is that you've seen this really big shift in that market where there's been this huge spike in ransomware claims because there's been this huge spike in ransomware. And so all of a sudden, the insurers are sort of trying to rethink their risk models, trying to rethink how they've been selling these policies. And one of the things that we've seen happen as a result of that are some pretty high-profile denials of claims. And in particular, the ones around defining cyber war that you mentioned are mostly around the NotPetya attacks from 2017. Yeah. And this question of, can insurers invoke these war exclusions to say, well, NotPetya...
Which they do on normal insurance, right?
Yes, exactly.
Take cyber out of it. I mean, that's an easy... Hey, a bomb hit your house from Russia. Sorry, doesn't count it.
Absolutely, right? This is standard language that goes back. When I start looking at some of the legal disputes, and I do a little bit of history in the book, this goes back to like Pearl Harbor. There are life insurance disputes where people who die in Pearl Harbor, their family members try to claim life insurance, and the insurers say, no, this was an act of war. And the families and their lawyers say, no, Pearl Harbor was, the day before the United States of America declared war. That wasn't war. And so you're right, it's been in these policies for a long time. And it's been sort of disputed in the past, not just around Pearl Harbor, it's been disputed around terrorist attacks and sort of whether those count as acts of war. And NotPetya's interesting. We're pretty confident the act of a nation state, right? It is attributed to the Russian government. It is part of
I think we're highly confident on that one.
We're highly confident.
and we're about to see the next iteration here. It's January 21st on 2022, but yeah.
Absolutely.
Agreed.
Right. So this has implications, not just for this incident, but for many more incidents, we think, potentially. And because of that, you have sort of what the insurers, I think, see as this opportunity to say, okay, this is really clearly a nation state attack. And it's not just a kind of one-off nation state attack. It's part of this ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. So there's, I think, a stronger case to be made than for many other cyber attacks that this is part of something that looks a little bit like war, or something that's at least sometimes called war in the context of the conflict between those two countries. And so you see, a couple of them, not just one insurer, not just one insured, getting into these legal disputes. And there's a big case pending around Merck, the pharmaceutical company. There's another one around Mondelez, the multinational food company. And the fights are really over, well, is NotPetya a warlike or hostile action, right? Does it fall under that category for insurance purposes? In the latest ruling, which actually just came out last month in the Merck case, the judge basically says no, right? He says, look, if you wanted this exclusion to apply to cyber attacks, you should have changed the language. But it's totally reasonable for Merck to think that would involve the use of armed forces. So there's this really interesting fight playing out, which is partly about NotPetya, but much more than that, about sort of what are we going to do about the next wave of nation state attacks and who's going to have to pay for them.
Yeah.
So one of the things I have a question about as you bring that up that comes to my mind is really around attribution, right? How do you determine that it was a nation state, not even getting into which nation state, but a nation state versus a criminal group like REvil? Theoretically, they're gone. I don't buy that, Rachel. But, operating out of a nation or on behalf of a nation state, do they even get into that level, or it really doesn't matter? It's any excuse they can get to cut their risk.
So I think that is important here, because when you look at the definitions in the actual insurance policies, the idea that there's a government behind a sort of an act of war is really important to that definition. Right. I think the reason you see these disputes crop up specifically around NotPetya is because there's not a lot of dispute around the attribution there, right? You get this coordinated multi-country attribution effort in which the United States, the UK, Canada, Australia, right, a whole bunch of governments put out statements that are like, we're quite confident this was Russia. And so I think in this particular case, you haven't seen many of the insureds trying to make the argument like, oh, this wasn't a nation state, because this particular incident is not a great one for doing that. And that's also, I think, why the insurers are sort of trying to test the water on this one, because they think they have the strongest possible case on that attribution issue.
Wow. Because I think people were kind of getting into a place of cyber insurance. Oh, my cyber insurance will just cover it. So I'm good. I'm not going to worry so much. And I think you had written in one of your other articles too about kind of, where does the onus of responsibility fall in these kind of things? I mean, like targeted organizations, what is their responsibility? And, kind of, I guess, organizations at large, like how do you prevent it? I mean, it's going to happen. So like, who's got the stick then to fix it, because jailing them is, there's 200 cyber criminals in jail, maybe worldwide. And I think you said in the first half of 21, $590 million have been earned by cyber criminals. I mean, something's got to change, but where?
So rates are going up. We're definitely seeing that. It's not totally clear kind of the ways in which the growth of the insurance industry in this sector has actually changed the question of who's responsible for what. And I'll say, that's a question that interests me a lot. The first book I wrote is really about that, is really about sort of who do we hold responsible for cyber attacks and failing to defend against them, and how do you kind of spread out that responsibility to all the different stakeholders who are involved in this ecosystem. And that was actually kind of what got me started thinking about insurance, because one of the things a lot of the people I spoke to for that book said was like, well, this is all going to end up being about sort of who gets insurance and what the insurers require from their policyholders. And I think one of the things that I come away from looking at this insurance industry feeling pretty strongly is that the insurers have not been able to deliver on the promise of sort of, we're going to collect a lot of data and we're going to figure out what everybody needs to do to sort of have strong security. And then we're going to be able to help them reduce their risk. So one of the reasons I wrote a book about this industry is I think that sort of trying to come to grips with that failed promise of what cyber insurance was going to bring to cybersecurity is really important for thinking about where we go from here.
So Eric, you had a question.
Yes, I did. So the question was really around, what I'm not observing in the industry is that behaviors are changing as a result of any kind of insurance increases or anything like that. I mean, I don't know that is driving behaviors at this point. I do think people are much more aware. I think boards are involved in asking questions, but I don't hear a lot. You don't read a lot. You don't talk to a lot of people at the C-level where cyber insurance is driving behavior, which you would think it would, right? Rates would either go way up or you'd have areas of risk because they reduced coverage. To me, those are the two levers that an insurance company has. And we just keep seeing more and more ransomware hitting and impact to businesses. I think in your 2018 book, Josephine, and there's a long question, but in your 2018 book, you list out a series of escalating incidents. But I don't see behaviors changing. Am I crazy?
No, I think that's exactly right. And I think sort of a lot of what brought me to cyber insurance as a topic was this idea of like, oh, this is how we change behavior, right? We get all the insurers writing these policies that require companies to do the things that are most effective. And the insurers are the ones who are going to be able to put together that data and figure out what those safeguards and controls are because they have all these claims. And I think you're exactly right. And I think there are a couple explanations for what's gone wrong in that. The first one and the biggest one is that I think sort of the process for buying cyber insurance is much lighter weight certainly than I anticipated when I went into this, right? So I would have thought, you're selling cyber insurance to a company, you're going to do a pretty intensive audit of what their security posture is, what safeguards they do and don't have in place. And I think that sort of for a variety of reasons, both because insurers often don't have the technical expertise in-house, or they're just trying to grow this market so quickly, they don't have the time and the resources to do that. There's really not that process. What there is there's usually a questionnaire. So you get sort of, let's say 10 to 20, maybe more like 40 now questions that say things like, do you have an incident response plan? And is there a person, who is responsible for security? And do you have firewalls?
Rachel's doing it.
Right. And so, and it's kind of questions where like, of course you can answer yes to all of them and they're designed so you can answer yes to them and they can sell you insurance. But answering yes to the question, do you have a firewall? Do you have an authentication policy? Have you implemented multi-factor authentication? Doesn't actually stop Colonial Pipeline, right? Doesn't actually sort of get at the really in-depth kind of security analysis you would want. And so I think there's been a real kind of failure there to try and change behavior in a meaningful way. And I think there's, some recognition of that now in the insurance industry, that those vetting processes are not really working in the way that we thought they were, or we hoped they were at least. But I think there's also just a lot of uncertainty about sort of where you go from here and how you make that better.
I'm thinking about the last time I did life insurance. I mean, they drew blood. I probably filled out 10 pages of family and medical history. Yeah. When you look at, think about any insurance. Even my homeowner's insurance, I periodically get this update talking about the condition of the roof and the materials of the house and everything. It seems like it's so much more stringent.
There are definitely much better risk models in place for all of those things, and sort of much more established insurance industry sort of verticals to look at all of those issues. And I think, part of this may be an issue of this is new and this is going to take time for the insurers to get a hold of. I think there are some reasons to think that there are more fundamental challenges here than just that, though. Right. And that it's not just sort of, because partly I say that because I would say as the industry has matured, even over the past few years, we haven't seen it necessarily moving in the right direction. We haven't seen it kind of getting closer. Okay, we're improving our risk models. We're, making the progress you would hope to see to feel like we're on a positive trajectory. And some of that just may be the nature of the threat landscape and sort of the boom in ransomware and kind of the things that the insurers were not anticipating. But I do think that you're right to say this feels different from other types of insurance. This feels like there's less of a handle on it and there's less kind of expertise and certainty.
Yeah, you reminded me of a conversation I had back, it had to be 2012 maybe, with my CEO at the time on how do you get promoted in cybersecurity? You buy the latest hot product and then you implement it. And nobody in the industry is focusing on outcomes. And the industry isn't consolidating as a result. And yes, protection is getting better over time, but the adversaries are moving faster and
Right.
we're falling further behind. And we see that, I think, in the
Absolutely.
results.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I think one of the things that's interesting to me about insurance is policy, which is kind of the realm that I
Right.
study most closely. The public policy space for a long time has had many people in it who are sort of saying, we can't move fast enough to make the cybersecurity
Yes.
regulations, right? Like government's slow and unwieldy. We really need the private
Yes.
sector. And so cyber insurance has kind of been held up as like, this is the private sector solution that's going to be able to move quickly and change rules
Right.
every year when policies are updated. And I would say again, so far, and I try to be optimistic about this, but so far we haven't really seen that kind of making good in the way we might have hoped a few years ago.
Yeah.
Yet we do have things like the NIST frameworks. And there are things where we have some level of standardization where they could form a basis for common questions, right? A common level. I mean, we're almost seeing it in Josephine. I don't know if you know about the CMMC work the government has been doing, which everybody has been arguing about, but there are different levels. And it's while it's being contested, a level 1 is very different than a level 3. Right. And there's certain things you need to do. You would think that they would have standards where it's more than just, do you have firewalls?
Yeah, I would say the NIST framework is actually a great example of something that the insurers have not been able to correlate with improved outcomes in their claims data, right? That, that they aren't able to say, oh, if you implement the NIST framework, then we see you will suffer fewer incidents or you will have smaller losses when you do.
Or at least parts of it.
Right. That's not a conclusion that sort of any of the underwriting teams I've talked to have ever been able to sort of come out confidently. Now, maybe that's because the NIST framework isn't working. Maybe that's because sort of the way it's being implemented is variable. Maybe that's because the claims data is not rich enough to sort of understand how well it's being implemented in different instances. I'll say, another thing that comes up in this, and now we're maybe too into the weeds, but that's often where I end up, is the insurers often don't have a lot of information about these incidents they're covering. Right. There are lawyers who are brought in to sort of oversee the incident response. And they often say, well, the final report is covered by attorney-client privilege. We can't share it with the insurer. And so the insurers themselves are often very frustrated and feel like, I have no insight into what went wrong here. I can't build a better underwriting model.
I thought it might be that or the lack of expertise in the industry. Right, the lack of understanding of cybersecurity in the industry, the insurance industry itself, that might hold them back. But it still doesn't answer for me why the premiums aren't super high. Then
premiums are skyrocketing in the past year, if that's any comfort.
Well, so maybe that will drive. I mean, I've found in business that cost will drive, money will drive behavior. So maybe we will see in the next couple of years a major difference.
I think that's possible. I mean, I think that to sort of see that difference, we would still need a better handle on what it is exactly we think organizations should be doing around threats like ransomware. And that's where I think the insurer's claims data would be most helpful, is in saying, well, if you have this kind of backup configuration, or if you have these types of multi-factor authentication controls, right, then we can really see that there's actually a much quicker recovery time, or it's much easier to get things back up and running. And so, of course, I'm hopeful that will happen. I don't think that it has yet. I don't hear sort of from the insurers themselves that they feel they can confidently make those assessments at this point.
So I believe, and like I said, I'm not an expert on cyber insurance, or insurance in general, but I believe cyber insurance will be one of the major movers, if not the major mover, that helps address the challenges in this industry. Consolidation, better protection of personal data. You talk about it in your first book, the motives for the attacks: financial gain, espionage, public humiliation of their victims, which we saw with Sony and many others. I think insurance will help us in those areas, but you've got to understand the adversary and you've got to understand what you're protecting against.
Right.
And I don't think most companies do a good job today.
I really hope you're right. It's why I started this project on insurance, because I thought this is a really important thing that I think and I hope is going to move this industry in a serious way. I think I go back and forth between feeling like it needs some more time. It's getting there. They're hiring more people with expertise. They're learning from their past mistakes, and feeling like are the carriers all just going to stop selling this tomorrow? Because
Right.
I think the last year and a half of ransomware claims has just been brutal. And you've
Yeah.
seen the insurers, some insurers, you've seen some reinsurers really sort of step back and reevaluate. Is this something that I want to sort of be a primary on? Is this something that I think I can kind of carry in terms of the amount of risk involved?
Well, if you just look at simple things like car theft, car insurance premiums are much higher in areas with higher car theft. That's an easy equation for an insurance company. I would think they would extrapolate the same type of logic to cyber insurance, right? If I have softer targets, Rachel, we've talked to a lot of people, state and local governments, city governments that are getting hammered with ransomware, soft targets. Hey, you know what? If you're not doing your job, we're going to raise the rates.
Yeah.
Or if they're more attractive targets, maybe critical infrastructure companies or companies that have a lot of intellectual property to lose or something like that, you would think the rates would be a lot higher.
So there is some of that for sure.
Good point. Yeah.
There's the challenge of figuring out who the soft targets are, which I think the insurers are still wrestling with. Certainly everybody's rates are going up, and they'll all tell you that. I think one of the things that some of the companies that purchase this insurance find frustrating is this feeling that sort of everybody's rates are going up regardless of what you have or haven't done around cybersecurity. So for instance, you mentioned the NIST framework. There's an interesting congressional hearing about cyber insurance several years ago in which they bring in some people who purchase for insurance for their companies. And people testify, I spent all this time and money implementing the NIST framework. And then when my insurance got renewed, the premium doubled anyway and nobody cared.
Wow.
Right. And so I think that there's a frustration on the policyholder side of, if I'm really good about security, that doesn't seem to get me anything in terms of a lower premium. So why would I spend the time and money on that?
Yeah. Well, it's like medical insurance or life insurance. Somebody who is grossly overweight with pre-existing conditions, heavy smoker, drug user, alcoholic, whatever, having the same exact rates as somebody who's running marathons or in perfect health. I don't know. You would think that the insurance company for medical insurance or life insurance, they do have different premiums. They understand that.
Right.
I don't think they get that yet for businesses. Like they don't understand how to measure, how to appropriately charge organizations, both on the risk side, but also on people who are doing the right things.
Right.
You would expect that to be, off, maybe is the best way to put it, on both sides. I don't know. Am I crazy, Rachel?
Well, but I think from what Dr. Josephine Wolff was saying, it sounds like there's if it's a 40 question questionnaire, right? I mean, how can they do the digging to validate? It doesn't sound like
if everybody's answering yes, and one organization's doing their utmost and one's doing nothing, but they all answer yes, they should be they're treated alike, I bet.
Well, how do you discern the difference? I mean, that's the thing,
you don't,
right? I mean, it's not like, I can get a blood test and you can learn a lot about me, but there's no blood test for.
But if there's no blood test, there's no difference between two individuals from that measurement angle.
Yeah, I think you've seen sort of a lot of partnerships. You've seen a lot of insurers trying to work with security firms to say, okay, we're going to have you go in and do the assessment of all of our potential policyholders and run the scans and that sort of thing. So you've seen some movement there. I'll say again, that very rarely affects the premiums, though. That's sort of, we have these partners, they'll do some risk assessments, but the premiums are almost entirely tied to how big is your company, how much revenue do you have? And so the policyholders themselves can see this is not really about my security posture or my vulnerabilities. Right. This is mostly about sort of how large a company am I and how much damage is the insurer therefore imagining I will be subject to.
So there's really no incentive then to be better from an insurance perspective.
There hasn't been. I'm hoping. I'm always optimistic that will change.
Yeah,
I
that
think
would be
the
good.
Insurers are always trying to get there and always struggling a little bit to figure out how.
Interesting. Okay.
Well, because you assume, right? I mean, basically, if you haven't been breached yet, you will, or it's just a matter of time. It's a laying in wait. cyber insurance sounds like a really risky kind of business to be in, because but 9 times out of 10, you're going to have to pay out on something unless you can find this definition of war or these other kind of, loopholes or not loopholes, however you want to look at them. I mean, it's really fascinating. And there's no clear path, right?
Yeah, I mean, it is a really risky business. I think you need to have a certain kind of confidence in your own risk models that's probably not deserved,
right?
To be selling this. I would say two things that are important to kind of keep in mind from the perspective of the insurers. One is this is still a sort of relatively small insurance market compared to like the really big ones, auto insurance, property and casualty insurance, but it's one of the only sectors of insurance that's growing really fast. So the insurers are under a certain amount of pressure to kind of expand this part of their portfolio and make sure they're not losing out to all of their competitors on who's going to win the cyber insurance customers. And the other thing I'd say, which is I just think really important to keep in mind, is that up until 2019 or so, it was a very profitable form of insurance compared to others, right? That sort of you paid out less of your premium intake percentage-wise than you did for auto insurance, than you did for sort of these other areas of insurance that had much better risk models. And because there were much better risk models, it was easier for all the different insurers to compete with each other on price. And so cyber insurance didn't feel really risky until 2020. Right. And then all of a sudden
2020 happens.
Went off the rails.
Yeah. So it starts to get crazy.
Yes.
Are they paying out in excess of their premiums, or they're just not doing as well as other types of insurance at this point?
Depends on the insurer. Depends on the insurer. Okay. I think some of them are paying out certainly in excess of their cyber insurance premiums, not in excess of all of their premiums across all sectors.
It's like a really bad driver.
Some of them I think are just not doing as well. But everybody's nervous, right? Everybody is feeling like this is a big change. This is sort of not the calculus that we had been assuming going back looking at the past 5-10 years.
So Rachel, we're in 22 right now?
Yes.
20. I'm betting by 25, they've got this pretty down, and they are moving the needle in organizations.
I really hope you're right.
I don't see them. I mean, Josephine, you know better than we do, but I don't see them losing their shirts for 5+ years and not making corrections. It's just not a normal business model.
Right.
Yeah.
I think the fact that ransomware is increasing, I think the fact that they are losing money in some cases or not as profitable in others will force them to come up with better models. I mean, the actuaries are going to look at this and say, look, we've got a set of data at this point that we can at least derive some idea of what's going on in the industry, and it's not heading in our favor. We need to change some things.
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay, 2025, Rachel, we'll get back on the show here and figure it out.
Yeah, I want to know, because
it'll take a few years.
The thing I think is interesting, though, was, you read the reports, I think in the last year, right, of cyber insurance companies being victims of ransomware themselves. People targeting, for their client list. Hey, they got ransomware insurance. Sweet. We got this great pool to go after. So then, if cyber insurance companies become the targets, then who gives them the cyber insurance,
This was, I don't know if you were following the story a while ago. AXA, one of the big insurers, announced that it was going to stop covering ransoms in France. Mostly because they were worried about sort of regulatory oversight and interventions. And almost immediately afterwards, unclear whether it was related or not, got hit with ransomware. And there was this sort of fear, I think, among a lot of insurers of like, oh, we should be careful of anything we say about ransomware coverage. Don't want to attract too much attention.
Totally coincidental, I guarantee it. But that's the thing in this industry. The risk is so low to the attacker.
Right.
Yep.
Like your best defense is stay quiet, don't upset anybody, just stay below the radar, right? You stay below your peer group and everybody else.
Absolutely.
I mean, I've said a number of times on this show, Colonial Pipeline would never have been attacked if they knew what was going to happen, right? That the president of the United States and the government of the United States would get involved.
Right.
They would have never made that. Just stay under the radar.
Right.
So that's an interesting question. I think... I'm trying to decide if I agree with that. I think
Okay, good. I like this.
Yeah,
Okay. I mean,
Rachel likes it even more.
You're right. I think it depends on sort of who's really pulling the strings behind that attack.
Right.
And if we think it's really just a financially motivated attack, then yeah, you're right. Right. The sort of financially motivated cyber criminals aren't interested in a lot of law enforcement efforts or, presidential statements. I think with Russia, there's always a possibility that the financially motivated cyber criminals are in some kind of partnership or coordination or even
we
just
pretty
kind
much
of
know
tacit
that.
agreement with the government. And I think with the Russian government, it's less clear to me that they wouldn't want to do anything that would rile the president of the United States or make a big public splash, right? I think NotPetya is an example of sort of the Russian government doing something that they knew would be incredibly public, incredibly disruptive, and going forward with it anyway.
Yeah, so I would argue like NotPetya was definitely directed, where if you look at some of the random ransomware attacks, maybe not random, maybe that's a bad word, but some of the spray of ransomware attacks, I don't think everyone is directed.
Right.
And I don't know that the nation state government said hit Colonial Pipeline. I think a nation state government may have said something to the effect of, hey, disruption of the United States of America, organizations in the United States of America is in our best interest.
Yeah.
We sanction that, go disrupt things. I don't know that Colonial Pipeline, and this is Eric's opinion only here, I don't think Rachel's on board with me yet.
Okay.
I don't think it came up on a target list with the intent to engage the United States government in the way it did. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, that's perfectly reasonable. I have no idea sort of whose decision
Nor do I.
Colonial Pipeline was. I do think that anybody, whether government official or cyber criminal or anybody else, probably could have made a decent guess that going after a major pipeline would elicit some pretty significant response. No, maybe
I don't even know if they went after a major pipe. If they even knew what they were hitting necessarily. I mean,
like a spray and pray kind of thing.
It's so easy. And
know,
do you understand the consequence?
I think if you're making a multi-million-dollar ransom demand, you know what you've got. I think that based on the size of the ransom they paid, they understood sort of what a high-profile target they were going after there.
Okay. Yeah. I wouldn't argue that logic at all.
And then they got some of the money back, which was kind of nice, rare but nice, I think. Yeah. It's not easy to do. Did they maybe because I think you had written about this as well, right, Josephine? I mean, was it an insider in the attacker group, or did the company somehow get an encryption key, or you almost have to get lucky and have lightning strike kind of thing if you're going to be able to claw it back, or maybe the crypto mixing firm gave it up.
I do think there's some luck involved. Obviously, the U.S. government doesn't reveal exactly how they got the keys to those wallets. Right. So I'm guessing a little bit about what happened. But I do think that either there was sort of clumsy choice of infrastructure on the part of the criminals that allowed for the U.S. government to issue some orders that enabled them to get access to part of this money, or there was some other sort of maybe an insider, maybe just kind of good espionage and surveillance work that enabled them to get their way. But certainly it is the exception, not the rule, right? I mean, it is not the case that sort of we've got tools that allow us to do that every time. It doesn't mean we shouldn't do it when we can. Obviously, I would rather have law enforcement clawing money back than not. I worry a little that sort of the message of that story to some people was like, oh, we should just pay ransoms. We can always get the FBI to get them back afterwards. And I do think it's important to kind of keep in mind that's a pretty unusual thing.
Yeah, that's not happening. Yeah.
Yeah, you should not be in the business if you're banking on that.
Exactly.
So let's pivot to artificial intelligence, because I know you've done a ton there, and Rachel's really excited about that. I think that's fair, right, Rachel?
I do. I love everything about AI, and there's just so many paths to take on it. You hear a lot of bias in AI though, and all the kind of bag of tricks that come with getting it right. And can you get AI right in cyber? especially when you're thinking about, people and understanding how they work. And,
Are you talking the attacker or the defender?
Well, I mean, I guess it could be both, but I mean, the defender, right? If you're using AI for security, how can you get it right? And it kind of blows my mind when you're how do you get there?
So I think a part of what's hard about this is that often we're kind of making up the metrics for success as we go. Right. Yes. And that there's no clear consensus on what it even means to get AI right and what that looks like, that we're sort of trying to figure out, okay, what are the different things you can measure here and how are we doing? And are we forgetting to measure some really important things that we should have thought of? I think you see that a lot in the bias space. That sort of one of the ways that people are trying to think about bias and fairness in AI is by coming up with new ways to sort of assess what is fair, what's unfair in an algorithm. Right. How do we sort of measure that in different ways that will allow us to try and understand that better? And until that there's sort of more consensus around that, I think it's probably a little bit tricky. So I think sort of the question of how do you get AI right is a really tricky one. And part of that is about trying to understand what are our ultimate goals. And in security, I think sort of the ultimate goals around AI are being able to use AI to detect attacks, maybe even to respond to them, right? To sort of do that anomaly detection work, but in a more sophisticated, more adaptive way than we're perhaps able to do it with existing tools. And then the other part of that, and it's sort of broadly across all applications of AI, I would say, is how do you secure algorithms and applications of AI themselves? How do you make sure that sort of they're not being manipulated or undermined or in other ways corrupted?
Yes.
Yeah, that is a big question. Right? How do you not corrupt the model how does an adversary not corrupt the model so that they can, get their gain and whatever it may be in that manner? Yeah. Because at some point you take the human out of the loop when you're using artificial intelligence.
Well, I think part of the question that we're seeing now in policy in particular, the EU draft AI regulations, those kinds of policy efforts, some of the DoD efforts around AI as well have been kind of focused on making sure there is a human in the loop, right? Saying, at what stage does a person need to oversee a final decision or, assessment or whatever the AI application is. And I think part of that has been trying to kind of nail down what are the different ways that humans can oversee artificial intelligence applications, right? What does it mean to try and have a sort of human in the loop somewhere, but still get the benefits of AI? And that's something that I think we're just beginning to see policymakers try to figure out.
Right.
DoD, for
instance.
Interesting. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying DoD, for instance, has had sort of a lot of principles and a lot of discussions about, we maybe want to use AI for certain kinds of video analysis or things like, if you've got thousands of hours of surveillance footage and you're trying to search for something in particular, that could be a really useful application of AI, but maybe not identifying and selecting targets for attack, right? Maybe that's the sort of thing that we really want a person to do. Yes, exactly. And so I think a lot of it comes down to sort of figuring out what are the specific places that we're comfortable not having human oversight and which are the places where we feel we really need it.
So I've done a decent amount of work in automation in cyber. Yeah, I certainly wouldn't call it artificial intelligence. Literally just, automation, doing routine stuff and removing the human from the loop. I've written on human machine teaming. But I agree with you fully. I mean, where do you draw that line? How do you educate the human in the loop or watching the loop on what they have to do? And I've seen a tremendous amount of pushback from the lower levels where, well, that's my job.
Right.
I don't want a machine to do that. And so, wait a minute, you will do a higher order activity, which is supervising the machine decisions. That's better for everybody. And they don't like that. And they don't necessarily, I would be concerned in some cases having some type of artificial intelligence or even just basic automation run if those humans weren't comfortable and able to address what their role is. and what the model does and doesn't do.
Right.
Yeah, so this is a huge AI issue as well, and sort of the workforce question, and it gets at everything, not just security, of kind of what happens to these jobs and who are you displacing or sort of removing because you've brought in automated systems is, I think, a massive question around both sort of trying to think through the consequences and the implications of using more AI and trying to predict where is this actually going to happen, right? You see all of these different predictions around like, oh, there are going to be no more human truck drivers in 10 years, or there are going to be no more people doing X, Y, or Z task. Yeah. And I think a lot of the time we haven't turned out to be great at making those predictions about AI, at sort of knowing what exactly is going to be fully automated, what kinds of human oversight are going to be needed, and what's that going to look like. And we also certainly, I would say, haven't been great at predicting the timeline of like, how soon do we think there won't be any need for human truck drivers? Is that 2 years out, 5 years out, 50 years out, et cetera?
And will we even use trucks at the point when we could bring technology to bear to do something like replace a human in a truck driver's seat? Yeah. No, it's an area where we've been talking at least a decade, I would say, in cybersecurity specifically about AI.
Yep.
I would think when I say that, I mean pretty heavily. I mean, I'm sure professors and scientists have looked at it for decades. But yeah, I'd say in the last decade of my career, we've seen machine learning and artificial intelligence really take a prominent position. Right. What I haven't seen is a lot of beneficial results.
Yep.
A lot of tools, and I'm struggling. I'm racking my brain right now. I know when I was at McAfee, some of the test rigs we had, which would go through hundreds of millions of samples a day, they were pattern matching. I mean, there was definitely some machine automation in there, I would say, which then needed some level of human review. I'm trying to think of customer level technologies, and I'm just drawing a blank right now.
I think it's pretty minimal right now, honestly. I think a lot of things are marketed that way. Won't surprise you to hear. But I think that
of course.
I think the actual sort of benefits, I would say we're still in very, very early stages. And I think that's true in the sort of consumer security market. I think it's true in the national security space with artificial intelligence applications, that you're seeing groups like the U.S. military sort of start to build up some efforts around AI, but not necessarily have great results yet or rely on them very heavily, just sort of trying to start experimenting a little bit and see where it's going. And I think there's probably, a ways to go still in all of those areas in terms of trying to figure out what exactly we're heading towards or how quickly that's going to happen. My sense is it all moves sort of slower than we usually expect, and that's why you haven't been able to see it.
Absolutely.
And I think things like targeting or looking through massive amounts of video or audio recordings, those are probably going to be easier than cybersecurity.
That's probably
I'm stepping out of my swim lane here, but
maybe
I'm
part
betting
of it as
human
well,
behaviors.
Right? Could be sort of, you could imagine those as security related applications, certainly.
Right.
Okay, I'm going to go on the podcast record here of saying I think the cybersecurity insurance piece will resolve itself before we see massive movement from an AI machine learning perspective in cybersecurity.
I concur.
Do you? I thought you might go the other way.
Well, yeah, I think insurance learns fast, right? I mean, I think they can learn quickly, and also because they have to, right? And
that's what I'm betting on. I'm betting on the currency being the driving force there.
Exactly.
Well, there's a lot of money wrapped up in AI too these days, but I think that makes sense to me. That sort of the insurance piece feels like a more settled and more developed space so far.
Right. Right.
Yeah, and let me be clear. I think there will be a lot of transactions. I think there will be a lot of experimentation, a lot of efforts. But I think the cybersecurity insurance needle will move.
Yes, I agree.
Faster.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on
Just
that.
a bet.
I'm still not totally sure I know what the timeline is for either, right? You say 2025. Yeah. I think that's a little optimistic, but I'm hoping with you that that's where we land for the insurance industry.
Dr. Wolff, let's be honest with ourselves. I was counting on my fingers. So I was like,
Sure.
okay, 22, 3. Yeah, I'm going to give it about 4 years and I think we'll see something because money's in play.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'd say...
Not educated.
The only thing I'd say, this is not to be negative or not to be pessimistic, is like 5 years ago, we were saying that about cyber insurance too. We were like, oh, we just need a few more years and like, we're going to figure this out and build better models. And I think instead sort of everybody became much more skeptical of the models in the course of those 5 years. So it will depend a little on kind of what the threat landscape looks like as well.
Well, let's talk about my very basic model as we're wrapping up here. I was counting on my fingers. I was thinking about it, and I was using Price is Right rules. I wanted to be below, not over the price target. So, don't listeners out there, don't go off of what I'm saying. It could be 2030, 2040, who knows? But I'll stick with 2025. Rachel, you got a vote?
I'm kind of leaning on the 27. Yeah, 27 to get it baked, but they'll get there. Yeah, they'll get there. I don't know. Josephine, what are you thinking?
So what are we counting as success? Like it's a booming market. Everybody has cyber insurance. The rates are really stable and standardized. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so.
I got to tell you, I think we're looking
We
at...
probably should define what we're talking about, right? When will we consider it like success?
A mature, exactly.
I think
a semi-mature market.
I think we're looking at the 2030 to 2035 range, I'll be honest.
Wow.
But I hope I'm wrong. I
Rachel,
very much hope I'm wrong.
I guarantee I'm wrong, Rachel.
We've got
an expert
in
and me.
2025, and we'll play clips of this conversation and talk about where we were wrong and right.
Well, this is the 4th year of our show, so if we double our lifetime, we probably can make that happen.
Excellent.
Rachel, what haven't we asked as we wrap up here?
Well, there's always my favorite question about optimism for, the cyber path ahead, but I'm kind of picking up some optimism here from Dr. Wolff. Yeah,
I think I'm optimistic, but I'm also trying to train myself to be optimistic on long time horizons. Right. Like, I think it's hard to feel really optimistic about 2022 or 2023 right now. I think I'm optimistic that sort of in the span of the next 5 to 10 years, we could make big progress, but I'm less optimistic that progress can happen in sort of immediate or short time frames. So
your book, you'll see this message when it's too late. Came out in 2018.
It's not a super optimistic title, is it?
No, but I love it because it's so accurate. And you basically argued from 2005, I think, if I have my years right, to about 2015, 16.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Things got progressively worse, and we really didn't do a whole lot about it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Is that fair?
Yeah,
Summarization?
that's pretty fair.
Okay. Yeah. So from 2015 to 25, am I hearing you say things will continue to get progressively worse and we will continue to do maybe not enough about it?
So I would say the first half of that period from 2015 to 21, 22, things
clearly
have continued to get worse. Yeah. I think...
Well, they did.
I want to say we're gonna turn a corner in 2022, and maybe even sort of late 2021. I think in terms of sort of attention and resources, I don't think we're going to turn a corner in terms of how severe the threat landscape is, but I think we're going to turn a corner in terms of how much attention and how much money and how much sort of focus from policymakers and organizations it's getting. And I think slowly over the course of many years, that's going to make a difference. Yeah. That's what I'm banking on.
Rachel, how much are we spending on cybersecurity protection right now? I think you have that number, don't you, roughly?
Is it 100? No, it's in the trillions, I want to say. Is that right? Or is it 150 billion? I get my numbers.
I should have prepped you for this one. I honestly don't remember the latest data. How much are we losing each year, Rachel? Do you have that data?
No, but I do know, as our CEO said when we caught up with him, is that cyber criminals are making so much money. They're basically the third largest country in the world
from a GDP perspective.
Right.
Yeah,
from the
that
US
sounds like a problem to me.
Yeah. They got some funds. Yeah.
Okay.
Not great.
No.
Josephine, as we wrap up, I am not quite as optimistic as you are. It's something I'm trying to get over, but I just year after year. So I'm not sure we turn the corner in 22, 23.
Mm-hmm. You never know,
see.
Eric. You never know.
We got to hope. We got to hope.
We got to hope. All right.
Great talking to you.
Yeah,
you as well.
Been amazing. And I'm looking forward to your book, Cyber Insurance, coming up.
Thank you.
When does that come out?
That'll come out in August.
Oh, nice.
Okay. And we can get your current book on Amazon.
Yes.
Because that's where I got it.
Yeah.
And I think MIT Press, right?
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. Well done. Well,
Yeah,
Dr.
it's up there with a couple of the good ones for me.
Thank
I
you.
love this stuff. It's page turner for me. I could read it in a weekend. It's so
I've got
much
like
fun.
Perfect Weapon and what's Nicole Perroth's book?
This is how they tell me the world ends.
Yeah, another great
Sitting
title,
right
right?
here.
You'll see this message when it's too late. You're right in there.
Yeah.
I've got those up there, and there's a nice book from Steve Grobman and Allison Sarah from McAfee. I'm trying to remember the title right now. A couple of them, but yours is right up there with it for me is what I'd recommend to somebody looking at the industry and trying to get a handle on it.
Yes.
Who comes from outside the industry.
Well, thank you so much.
Or hell, even is in the industry. But it's
exactly.
Hey, read this and it will give you a generalized, with examples, of course, but it'll give you an idea of where we are in the industry today and the problems we deal with.
Right.
Yeah. Cool.
All right. Well, Dr. Josephine Wolff, thank you so much for joining us this week. It's been great talking to you.
Such a pleasure. Thank you both so much.
Yeah, you're welcome back anytime. I mean, you don't have to wait until 2025.
But we'll call you back at that point.
And as always, thank you so much to our listeners for joining us this week. And, as we like to say, smash that subscription button, smash it, and you get a fresh episode in your email inbox every single Tuesday.
Sounds like our puppies are listening today, Rachel.
They are.
So that's a good thing.
They love today's episode. They're very excited.
Take care, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Stay safe.
Take care.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us on the To The Point Cybersecurity Podcast, brought to you by ForcePoint. For more information and show notes from today's episode, please visit www.forcepoint.com/govpodcast. And don't forget to subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts.